Hey guys, welcome to the RotoPros pre-lock show for Thursday night. Pretty short slate here. We've got 4 games and most of the lineups are out. I delayed the start a little bit, waiting for the Kansas City Royals to release their starting lineup. It still looks like we don't have it. So I guess hopefully it comes out during the show and I can weigh in a little bit more on the Royals because I do think that's a really strong spot tonight. But just to give it some more time, and because this is the order we always go in, starting with pitching tonight. So I think pitching is actually pretty easy today. We have a lot of good pitchers, actually. There are only 4 games, but there's one particular matchup that features 2 very good starting pitchers, and I don't actually like either starting pitcher for this slate. So that's Charlie Morton and Mike Clevinger. One thing that's going on here is that sharp money is very clearly on the over for this game. So the over-under opened at 8, and it's starting to trend up towards 8.5, despite the fact that about 70% of people are betting the under. I think what's going on here is that the pitchers are just a little bit overvalued. Charlie Morton has an ERA that's below 2 this season, but his FIP and XFIP are kind of around 3, maybe low 3s. So Morton's a very good pitcher, but I think he's a little bit overrated right now. He's coming off 2 very, very strong games where he gave up 1 run in each game. He had 22 strikeouts across the 2 games. So I think that the recency bias is helping Morton a little bit here in terms of what the betting line was, and sharp money is kind of seeing Morton as more of a good but not truly great starting pitcher. It's kind of tough to really figure out what Morton is because his career trajectory is very strange. He's someone who's dealt with a lot of injuries in the past. But there's no question he's been really, really good this year. So I don't think Morton is bad, but I definitely think Morton is too expensive. He's facing the Indians on the road, which is a very tough matchup, and he's priced all the way up to $11,400, which I think is a pretty reasonable baseline price for him in general, but not in this matchup. I think he should probably be around 10K or so for this matchup. So I don't like Morton at all. Clevinger, on the other hand, is less good of a pitcher than Morton, but he's way cheaper and he does have home field advantage. But still for Clevinger, it's just he's facing the Astros offense, and the Astros offense has kind of struggled this year relative to what we would normally expect from them, but they're still a top 10 offense. Last year, they were a top 3 offense, and they've just been a little bit worse this year. But I still think this is a really tough matchup for Clevinger, too. He's more in play than Morton, but I think I kind of want to have almost none of Clevinger. Definitely 0 Charlie Morton, and I think just minimal Clevinger. They're just better picks, I think, and I don't think salary is too much of an issue tonight. The bats are pretty cheap. If you use Blake Snell, you really don't need to worry too much about the salary of your second pitcher. So I'll get to Snell in a second, but I don't think the savings on Clevinger from the high end are really all that necessary. So I think he's an okay play. I think he's kind of just fairly priced. It's not a big slate, so he's kind of just okay to use, I think. But I just am kind of indifferent on Mike Clevinger. So if he happens to fit in the last lineup spot, fine, but I really am not actively targeting him for today. So the 2 pitchers I like the most, well, there's 3 guys I like a lot, but I'll start with the ones who are more expensive and kind of just make more sense from lineup construction standpoints. Rick Porcello against the Rays is probably he's a little bit more expensive than what his baseline is. Porcello has been really inconsistent the last few years, but this season he's been very, very good. It's kind of hard to figure out what to more, but there's no question that he's pitched well this season with a 3.39 ERA, 2.80 FIP, 3.32 XFIP. His swinging strike rate is a career high 10.1%. This is actually the first time in his career he's actually been below 9% almost every year. Last year was his previous career high at 9.4. So it looks like Porcello is getting better at generating swings and misses as he's aging, which is kind of strange. I mean, I guess he's technically in the prime of his career at 29 years old, but Porcello has definitely become more of a strikeout pitcher over the last 2 years, and he has a career average of 6.4 Ks per 9, but this year he's up to just under 9 Ks per 9, almost a strikeout per inning. So against a Rays lineup that is very right-hand heavy, a lineup that just isn't very good overall. I think it's a pretty strong spot for Porcello. I was hoping that Wilson Ramos would be out tonight. He is back in the lineup. He missed yesterday's game with, I think it was a hand injury. Ramos is in there, so it's a downgrade for Porcello there, but it's not enough of a downgrade to really change the outlook too much. So I'm slightly lower on Porcello than I otherwise would be because of that, but I still think he's the guy to pay up for tonight. I think he's a much better player than Charlie Morton. I'm not even sure if he's that much worse than Charlie Morton. He is a substantially easier matchup in a much better pitcher's park in Tampa Bay compared to Cleveland. So Porcello over Morton, I think, is a really easy call. I'm not even sure that ownership will favor Porcello too much here. It could be pretty spread out, so I'm not worried about chalkiness on that pick either. And then on the other side of the game, I think the best pricing value and I think the best tournament play of the night, because I don't think he'll be that highly owned because he's facing the Red Sox, is Blake Snell. So the Red Sox have a 120 WRC plus against righties this year. They are only at 81 against lefties. And it's only Mookie Betts and Hanley Ramirez on the entire team that are hitting lefties better than righties. So Betts and Ramirez are batting first and second. I think Martinez is definitely a scary hitter against lefties. He was better against lefties last year, but he's been reverse splits for whatever reason this season. But the Red Sox have to sit Andrew Benintendi because they're facing a lefty. So that gets Jackie Bradley in the outfield. JD Martinez, instead of DHing, plays in the outfield. And then Moreland and Hanley Ramirez are in there. So they're starting the left-handed Moreland, left-handed Devers, switch-hitting Sandy Leon. Eduardo Nunez has been awful against lefties this year. Xander Bogaerts has been a reverse splits hitter this year. And Snell is just a really good pitcher. His numbers this year are well above average. He's a strikeout pitcher. At 8,000 in probably a neutral matchup. I mean, I know the Red Sox 81 WRC plus is well below average. I think there should be some regression there, but it might be safe to assume the Red Sox are merely an average offense against lefties going forward. And Snell is a very good pitcher that's priced too low for how good he is. So home field advantage, pitcher's park, all of that on top. Snell makes the most sense of anyone tonight, and he should be, I think, everyone's highest owned pitcher, although he probably won't be because the Red Sox they have the name value of the Red Sox. Mookie Betts is very scary. So people won't use Snell probably nearly as much as they should be. So Porcello and Snell, I think those are the two guys that make sense to pay up for. And then the rest of the pitchers are very, very cheap. Zach Davies at 6,100 against the Mets. The Mets are a bad offense, but they're much better against righties. They have a very lefty-heavy lineup, and Davies is coming off a shoulder injury. He made one rehab start in actually low A, where he didn't even make it 5 innings. So Davies might even be on a pitch restriction. I'm not totally sure what's going on there, but I don't like Davies at 6,100. I think Steven Matz is in a pretty bad matchup against the Brewers, who get Ryan Braun back tonight. Very right-hand heavy lineup. I think there's upside for Matz because he does get strikeouts and he is cheap, but he's just not good. And I think there's more blow-up potential than good game potential for Matz. So I think that's a fade for me, but I would maybe include him in a couple lineups. The Brewers should be very chalky, so maybe there's some leverage there with Steven Matz. I think he's sort of an okay play, but I would want very, very limited exposure to him because I definitely prefer the Brewers offense to Steven Matz. And then in the last game of the night, we have Austin Biebensderks, who is not worth considering. He's the worst pitcher on the slate by far. But on the other side of the game, Danny Duffy, I think, is really interesting at 4,300. That's a very, very low price for him. And the Rangers offense strikes out 27% of the time against lefties, which is tied for the most in baseball with the Mets. They don't have Jerks and Profar in the lineup, so they have more lefties, more lefties than we would have actually expected tonight. All right, let's see. We got the Texas lineup up. So Shin-Soo Choo, left-handed, is in there. Nomar Mazara, Joey Gallo, Rougned Odor, and then Hanser Alberto is starting over Jerks and Profar. That's definitely a downgrade too. So there aren't really any scary righties in here. I mean, there's a couple. We have Rua and Chirinos hit for some power. I don't think Keener Falafa is a good hitter, and Delano DeShields is a DFS-friendly player. He can get on and steal bases, but he's not a particularly good hitter either. So this is actually a really easy matchup for Danny Duffy outside of it being a very strong hitter's park. But I think the strikeout upside is there. And something I mentioned yesterday is that Duffy has gotten rocked recently, but his last 4 starts have come against the Yankees, in Baltimore, in Boston, and in Cleveland. So it's been really tough matchups for Duffy. And this one's a lot easier against Texas. So I think Duffy is a pretty good play against them. And we've seen a ton of sharp money that favors the Royals too. They open at plus 115 and they've moved all the way to minus 120. And that's totally against the public too. They're only getting 37% of money line bets. And they've seen a really ridiculous line move here. And Duffy is underrated, I think, a little bit by how he's pitched recently. There's a chance he goes back to being an average pitcher that he was last year, but even if he's still bad, there's still a lot of upside for him against Texas. And then the Royals offense against Biebens-Dirks, that's a good spot just because of how bad of a pitcher he is. Doesn't get any strikeouts even as a reliever. He has bad minor league numbers. He's been bad in the majors. Just by all accounts, is a pretty awful starting pitcher. So it's a very good spot for the Royals on both fronts, on offense and for Duffy. We don't have a Royals lineup yet, so I'll get to offense in a second. Maybe it's out now. Still no Royals lineup. All right, so I'm going to check one more place, see if I can find it. Doesn't look like we have it, though. I think it's safe to assume that John Jay, Mike Moustakas, Jorge Soler, Whit Merrifield, Salvador Perez. This is a night game. There's no real reason to expect that anyone rests. And whenever Salvador Perez needs a day off, they just DH him. Moustakas, same thing. They just DH him sometimes. So assuming that the Royals have their regulars in, that's my favorite offense tonight. They're facing the worst starting pitcher, so I think that's the majority of it. They're also in a hitter's park. And the Rangers' bullpen is pretty depleted after they had to – well, it's been 2 games in a row now, actually. I think 3 games in a row where they really needed their bullpen a lot against the Yankees. They gave up a lot of runs to the Yankees this week. So the Rangers have had to burn through a lot of their relievers to start the week, and they don't have too many good relievers to begin with. But we'll probably see Matt Bush in the game tonight, and he's just awful. Either way, though, it's a terrible starting pitcher. They might need him to go a little bit deeper in the game than they otherwise would because the bullpen is a little bit banged up. So the Royals are in a very, very strong spot tonight, and they're not that expensive. The prices might look a little high, but considering who they're facing and where they're facing them, I don't think it's too expensive at all for the Royals. So that's my favorite offense tonight. I think offense can mostly be avoided in the Red Sox-Rays game. Mostly because I like both pitchers a lot. It's a pitcher's park. There are much better spots in these other games. So the pure expected output that I think should be the highest is the Royals. I think the offense that scores the second most runs tonight is probably the Brewers. So if you're not factoring in contact runs, okay. If you're not factoring in ownership at all, you just want the teams that are the best values. I think it's the Brewers and the Royals. I don't really have too much interest in the Rangers because I just don't think they're that good, but I think they make a little bit of sense in non-Duffy lineups. They're probably my 4th or 5th favorite offense, though. So 1 and 2 is Royals and Brewers, definitely. I think the Mets are an interesting contrarian spot against Zach Davies. I think they'll just kind of get overlooked tonight because the Mets usually get overlooked. They're not a team that has a ton of ownership really ever. And Davies is coming off a throwing shoulder injury that sidelined him for a month. This also is very, very unlikely to be a Josh Hader game. He pitched 2 days ago and went 2+ innings like he always does. So no Josh Hader probably tonight for the Brewers. So strong spot for the Mets. I think that's the 3rd best offensive option. And then I think the Indians potentially as a contrarian stack against the Astros are worth looking at too. Just because I think Morton will be pretty chalky. The Indians' offense is really good. But I think the Indians make more sense for plugs because there's just not a lot of upside stacking against the Astros. Morton's good. The whole bullpen in Houston is good. And the same can kind of be said on the other side of the game, although the Indians' bullpen is a lot less scary than the Astros' bullpen. So maybe a contrarian stack of the Astros and the Indians make a little bit of sense. But for the most part, I think it's the Royals and Brewers are the priorities with some Mets. I think Rangers, Astros, and Indians as plugs, or maybe just 1 or 2 stacks of each team. And then I'm off the Red Sox and Rays. And it's only 4 games, so I think that pretty much does it. Summarizing again at pitcher, I think Porcello maybe 70% or so, Snell maybe 80 to 90%. And then I think the rest of the spots you can occupy with Danny Duffy for the most part, maybe a little bit of Mike Clevenger if he fits. So that's going to do it. Good luck to everyone tonight. Back same time tomorrow, and see you then.